Gavawusi, greetings. Tungasugisi. Thank you and welcome to The Path Forward, the role of teacher education in language revitalization. Thank you so much for joining us on this day of where we celebrate the National Indigenous Languages Day. My name is Aluki Kutuk. I'm joining you from beautiful Iqaluit, Nunavut. We're very curious to find out where you're joining us from, so please let us know where you're joining us from through chat. I am a member of the Rideau Hall Foundation's National Advisory Committee on Indigenous Teacher Education, and I'll be the moderator for this panel today. The Rideau Hall Foundation is an independent and charitable organization that aims to connect people, causes, and organizations that share a common belief and commitment to learning, leadership, giving, and innovation. Through the Indigenous Teacher Education Initiative, the Rideau Hall Foundation seeks to amplify the importance of First Nations, Inuit, and Métis educators and the value that they bring to their students, communities, and the country. We are in for a treat. Today's panel will explore the powerful role of Indigenous teacher education and language immersion programs in revitalizing Indigenous languages. Today, you'll hear from Indigenous educators and leaders on how these innovative programs are working to strengthen communities and revitalize Indigenous languages for generations to come. Please feel free to use the YouTube chat function to share questions or comments. We will have a period where we will be able to answer some of the questions at the end of this session. We are very honored to have Commissioner Ignace join us today, and I would at this point like to invite him to provide a few remarks before we begin with the panel discussion. Commissioner Ignace?
Thank you. And thank you, Luki Kukstakuk. And I'd like to thank the Rideau Hall Foundation for having me. My Indigenous, my Sukwapam name is Tmalkat. It means being placed at the head of an arrow, but my baptized name is Ronald Ignace. I'm a member of the Sukwapam Nation in the interior of British Columbia, and I'm honored to be the Indigenous Language Commissioner and humbled to be that. And it's also an honor to join you alongside Quebec and Russell in celebration of National Indigenous Languages Day. During this event, we are learning and exchanging ideas about how we can better strengthen our resolve to revitalize our languages, which is the cradle of our spirit, which has suffered immensely over the years. Indigenous languages capture years of living on our homelands and embody the wisdom of our ancestors and guide us in situating the significance and value of Indigenous traditional knowledges embedded within our languages. Our stories talk of human relationships, which create social obligations in our traditional laws, relational and reciprocal accountability among future generations, inclusive of sentient beings. Over the 70 different Indigenous languages in Canada, most are merely two generations away from becoming extinct and hanging by the thread when once we were multilingual nations. The late Laura Harry from Shuswap country is at Alkali Lake told us many years ago, the salmon are our first children, and we need to protect and nurture them in the same way we protect and nurture our own offspring. And we have another word that's important, tult, that in my language, it describes the ability for one to utilize their energy to transform matter. And we understood how the universe works from energy into matter and matter into energy, which we use to manage our relations with each other and our lands. In conjunction with that is another important word, which Indigenous peoples have the same sentiment across the country. The word is chans, meaning if you disrespect nature, she will turn on you. However, you respect the land, it will take care of you, bringing us back to the law of reciprocal accountability rooted in respect. Naturally, then, the revitalization of languages is an effort to preserve our nationhood and a commitment to protecting the traditional scientific knowledges inherent within. Government or entities must not denigrate the knowledges. It goes against our humanity and our rights. We cannot exist in a future without our languages. They are foundations of our nations. Our goal must be to put the Indian back in the child. Our languages were never envisioned to exist, let alone be taught. This means that Indigenous languages are not true teachable subjects, since our children cannot learn in their languages, and nor are languages meaningfully incorporated into formal education systems. From my experience, where I come from, 15-minute lessons a couple of days a week are not producing fluent speakers and have not in the last 30 years. Sadly, fluency and immersion teacher training is not funded nor valued, even though our languages are unique to our homelands and are not being taught anywhere else in the world. There is an over-reliance on mother tongue speakers who are aging out. And the Commission has taken on the role of convener to advance this initiative. This is about the intergenerational transmission of our languages by adapting, not adopting, the most promising practices rooted in Indigenous knowledges and worldviews. Indigenous peoples in Hawaii and New Zealand have forged the exemplary path forward for the revitalization promotion of Indigenous languages. Their successes have inspired similar efforts worldwide. We honor their efforts and achievements. So in essence, the revitalization of our languages must deploy our place-based knowledges to heal ourselves and our homelands, not only for the good of Indigenous peoples, but for the good of all.
Thank you for your welcoming remarks, Commissioner Ignace. Today, we are grateful. We have three amazing Indigenous leaders who are on our panel. Dr. Ronald Ignace, the Commissioner of the Office of the Indigenous Languages, Kavik Kalorak, Chair of the Nunavut Teacher Education Program at Nunavut Arctic College, Russ Fayent, faculty at Saskatchewan Urban Native Teacher Education Program from Gabriel Dumont Institute. I'm going to invite each of them to provide a short or a brief introduction. So maybe I'll start with you, Russ, if you could provide a brief introduction of yourself.
Absolutely. Thank you for that, Aluki. And thank you, Dr. Ignace, for those opening words, which really resonate with me and with the work that I do. But Tanche Kiowao, Rasfeant, de Shenekashon, Egua Lavelikata Pue Doshtin, Maka Opashtauli Zuni Weekend Equa, Na Toshkan Por Gabriel Demon Institute, Tande Nakishana Mahan, Lelang de Michif, Lizistuera de Michif, Egua Not Pemachanan. Nawakama wak li fayan li dajurle li rasad egwa mishtet le valley ushte wak le valley katapwe egwa nikishti tamone mechefa wean. So thank you for having me on the panel. I'm really honored to be here. My name is Russ Fayant, and I work for the Saskatchewan Urban Native Teacher Education Program at the Gabriel Dumont Institute, where I teach courses in Métis epistemology, Métis history, and of course the Métis language, Michif. So nice to meet everybody today, and thanks again for having me.
Thank you, Russ. May I ask Kavik to provide an introduction, please?
Matna aluki kavak kalogaw yung nga kamanik tuang yung daw yung nga nunabum mi ilin na titsik sa ilin na mingan ni nunabut hilat to hapingan ni it's about tagayaw yung mana it's about akakanang mayugot kalung ni tung nga huk nga kubya huk nga okadugyak tok titaw yung nangamatay ko pilagaya himayabut hak kitaw himayut hunaw mga ta malud namut turang na yang mga ta ilin na tulagan ng mi. Thank you. I'm honored to be here. My name is Kavak Kaloak. I'm the chair of the Nunavut Teacher Education Program. I co-chair the program that's offered through Nunavut Arctic College. I'm very excited to be able to talk about the advances that we have made in teacher education in Nunavut and the direction that we might be going for education. Matna.
Poyanami Kavik. I'm going to now turn to Commissioner Ignace.
Wait, Ron Ignace, the instruction Smelkin. So I come from Shuswap country. I was I'm an escapee from the Kamloops Indian Residential School. At the age of 10, I couldn't take it anymore, so I ran away and went on my way, and I later became fought for our languages. Went home to my elder, and my elder said that we want you to go out and study in the white man's world, and all that you learn, I want you to come back and help our people. So I did that, and I wound up being the first Indigenous Languages Commissioner, and I made it the point of establishing my sub-office in the Kamloops Indian Residential, where I ran away from, and I said, I'm here to stay, we run no more.
Thank you all so much for providing an introduction. I think we're going to jump right into it with the first question, but I think every time I listen to discussions about language, it strikes me each time how quickly languages disappear or stop being used. And I think in your welcoming remarks, Dr. Ignace, you talked about how many Indigenous languages in Canada are 2 generations away, I think you said, of becoming extinct. So I think the first question is very relevant to this discussion. It's how do culturally relevant Indigenous-led programs contribute to Indigenous language revitalization efforts? And I'm going to ask each of you to respond to that. I'm going to start with Kavik, please.
So in the context in Nunavut, there are other programs that are either nonprofit or privately owned, where they offer culturally relevant Indigenous-led programs, like through the Perovik Center, as well as Iditaksinak, the Nunavut Literacy Council. But what I'd like to talk about is what we've done through teacher education. And this winter, I had a chance, when I was in Iqaluit for work, I had the opportunity to listen to an Inuk elder talk about the time when Inuit were able to establish education committees to advise local schools. They decided that their main objective was to bring Inuktitut into schools so that their children can learn in their mother tongue. And because our children spend so much time in schools, the challenge that they were faced with was who is going to teach them the language? Because at the time, the teachers in schools were primarily non-Inuit who did not speak the language. It was determined that in order for Inuit children to be taught in their language, you need Inuit teachers that can teach them the language. Then the challenge became, how will Inuit teach in schools when schools were a foreign concept? And this led to the development of the teacher education programs. Initially, there was a certificate program, a diploma program, and then a degree program, where Inuit could be classroom assistants and eventually a classroom teacher. Since then, the teacher education program has continued and has had various partnerships. But when we were contemplating the new program that we're currently offering and where we might be going into a Nunavut designed program, this involved looking into offering the program and reimagining the goals of the program. And it was determined that we needed more Inuktitut and Inuit culture implemented and integrated into the program in order for it to be culturally relevant. What we learn is that the context of Inuit communities varies. So we learned that in some communities, Inuktitut language use is strong and remains the primary language of communication. And in some communities, they have experienced significant language attrition. And there are very few speakers, usually from the generations of our elders, with youth not having learned in their mother tongue. In response to those unique contexts, we've developed 2 streams of the program that comes from the Inuit learning model that was published in the Inuit Kaime Tokingit Foundation documents. One aim is to develop teachers who have the professional skills to train to teach primarily in Inuktitut, and in the what we call the emergent stream are the students who have Inuktitut as an additional language or who are not fluent in Inuktitut, take courses aimed at developing their Inuktitut skills in various areas. Another significant part of that is to implement and integrate Inuit Kaime Tokangit so that it's in every aspect of what we do in our work. We're at the beginning stages of understanding what that means in a post-secondary context, but we're continuing to do that type of work. The program is culturally relevant, but it's also culturally responsive, where the local context and the local resources are important to the teaching and learning of the program. We have elder advisors, knowledge keepers, and program staff who work together in the various communities where we offer the program, and we're working towards being a culturally based program, but this will require more time and more work, where we're bridging traditional Inuit knowledge with contemporary school context, as well as Inuit Kaime Tokangit, so that what we're seeing in schools, in Nunavut schools, where there's limited Inuktitut language of instruction and Inuit content, we can further advance that by training teachers in our program. So those teachers are our current students who are training to teach the language will be able to go to the schools, teach the language, and in the language. So,
thank you for your response there. I'm going to now move over to Commissioner Ignace. If you'd like to respond to the question, do you want me to read the question again, or are you good?
Yeah. We as a commission, our mandate is to support and champion the work of Indigenous peoples' efforts at revitalizing and strengthening their languages. And because in our mandate is very specific in that they are the ones that are best placed to revitalize their languages. And so as a First Nations Commission, we know that Indigenous peoples are best placed to lead their efforts. And we are here to promote Indigenous languages and amplify their voices. And so this is what we've been doing. And we've been hosting regional programs across the country to hear what their strategies are and how the Commission could assist them. And the Indigenous, and what we hear is that Indigenous-led programs are essential and fundamental for the aspects of self-determination, and advancing language revitalization efforts are fundamental to ensuring programs meet the needs of the communities across this country.
Thank you, Commissioner. I'm now going to ask Russ to provide your response to the question.
Thank you. So the Suntep Regina program has been in existence for about 45 years in Saskatchewan. And so for that entire period, Suntep has been an Indigenous-led program that centers Indigenous, specifically Métis pedagogies and Métis ways of being in the world. We did some reflecting about 15 years ago in our program and realized that our first generation Michif speakers were dying away quite quickly, and that we had a real sense of urgency to help do what we could to revive the Michif language. So that resulted in the development of a 3-week land-based Michif immersion 6-credit course that our program now offers all of our students. So every single student that takes our program must take that 3-week Michif immersion course. And I would say how that has helped to contribute to Michif language revitalize efforts specifically. I think one of the things that we do really well here at Suntep is that we tend to hire our graduates. And so I am a graduate of the Suntep Regina program. And I think when you have people that are of the community that are doing that important work, it's much easier to get buy-in with community partners. There's no way that any of us can do Michif revitalization work without getting buy-in from our first generation speakers, but also from community partnerships that can assist us to do that work. So the speakers that I work with, and with Michif, we're we're really in and amongst our last generation of first generation speakers. And there's a sense of trust because they recognize me, because I am one of them. I'm related to them. Many of the people that I work with are my aunties and my uncles. And so there is that implicit trust that they know that the work that I'm doing is work that is worthwhile, and it's not work that is being used to benefit me in any other way other than to help my community revitalize their community, and to restore intergenerational transmission amongst my younger students and our last generation of first gen speakers. I would say that one of our successes at Suntep specifically that has carried over into our Michif camp is that our center is really a place of learning that centers linguistic pedagogies that privilege Indigenous ways of knowing and being. In particular, a phrase that we often use in the territory that I'm in is "mio wakohtawin," which means good relationships. And it's a small phrase, but it actually it implies a lot of things about how to do work ethically with elders, how to make sure that we're not doing anybody harm, and how to make sure that the work that we're doing is not just benefiting our students, but ultimately is benefiting the wider community. I would say that when programs are led by Indigenous people and are led with Indigenous epistemologies and pedagogies at the forefront, they allow our learners to feel at home and to take risks. And I've come to understand as a language learner and speaker that that's probably one of the most valuable tools that we have to assist learners to reclaiming their languages, to allow them to feel comfortable in doing that process. And so I'm able to achieve that because I operate with Mio Wakotawin. I build good relationships with elders. My students see my language teachers as their own aunties and uncles and often refer to them as such. And so what we're trying to do is really create that context of kitchen table learning where people feel warm and welcome and okay to, to mispronounce words or to fall down every now and then because they know they're going to be supported by their community. And so that's been really key to the work that I do is making sure that these programs are led by people, not just Indigenous people, but Indigenous people who really understand, have internalized, and are able to share our traditional ways of knowings and beings, and to create that context which allows people to feel comfortable and able to take those important risks. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So building upon these responses, we're going to go to another question for each of you. And I'll start with Commissioner Ignace. How do Indigenous teacher education programs and language immersion programs complement each other in the revitalization of Indigenous languages? And in what ways do they uniquely address the needs of Indigenous communities?
I think each have the opportunity to uniquely respond to the community needs. While immersion programs focus on creating fluent and proficient speakers, Indigenous teacher education programs play a key role in culturally relevant and responsive education. And together they can create better conditions to support language revitalizations. After all, our languages and by extension, values, cultures, and traditions, and ecological knowledges embedded within are not reflected in the education system in a way that safeguards their existence. Well, this in operating in this fashion, we can do that better on our own terms and references. And my hope would be one day to see our math, sciences, and all taught in our languages. For example, we started off an ethnobotany program, and through that we were able to talk about biology, chemistry, agrology, geology, and such. Through that, embedding that in our teaching program. As it relates to science, as I pointed out, we need to study our ethnobotany that will teach us about all of these. This integrating allows us to integrate the science into our revitalizing our language through our languages revitalization strategies.
Thank you. I'm now going to ask the question to Russ, if you could respond to the question.
Sure, thank you. So I think teachers are really well positioned to do language work, and it's for a few different reasons. I think first and foremost, we're positioned in a context, i.e., schools, that allows us to spread the language quickly and efficiently. And second to that, I would say that teachers, through their training, really understand strategies and curriculum development, which are really useful in Indigenous language reclamation work. So we know how to develop or find good resources. We know how to engage students in an active and fun way. We also know how to develop assessments so that we can keep track of how our students are learning and how fast they're learning and fill those gaps of maybe where they're not learning. One area that I think we don't often talk about, but certainly is the condition in Saskatchewan, is that many of the faculty who work at the TEPS in Saskatchewan are simultaneously teaching and also pursuing graduate studies, whether those be master's degrees or PhD programs. And I think what that does is it creates this sort of synergy where you have people that are working with their own community-based knowledge that they've received either through their upbringing or through maintaining those relationships with community. But we're also being exposed to theory and best practice, which is being done by a lot of language activists who are kind of at the forefront of language innovation in this country. So I would say, you put those two things together, that community-based knowledge and that being exposed to theory and best practice, and you really have a formula for critical praxis when it comes to transforming the way that our languages are taught and transmitted. I would also say that we address the needs of Indigenous communities because, as Indigenous people ourselves who work in these programs, we really understand the socio-historical impacts of language loss. Many of us come from people who had their language taken away and heard those stories growing up, and so we understand the context in which language has not been lost, but in fact has been taken away from our families and our communities. We also center the restoring of mentor-apprenticeship relationships, which Dr. Ignace made reference to intergenerational transmission, and that's key. And because we come from these two worlds of community-based knowledge, but also theory, we're able to link the two, I think, quite effectively. I think that we know the spaces, the places, and the traces of Indigenous language revitalization. Spaces being what are good contexts for learning. And for me, that means creating a kitchen table context where people feel really at home while they're learning the language. Places being the places where our languages once lived and thrived. And so for me, that's places like the place that I come from, the Qu'Appelle Valley, which still has lots of speakers, and I make a real effort to make connections between my students and those places. But I would also say we understand the traces of ILR, and the traces are what I would consider to be, the remaining speakers that are left. And so, those of us that are from the community are able to find those speakers and to build good relationships with them, and make sure that their expertise can grow and be shared with those of us who really require it. So.
Thank you, Russ. I'm now going to turn to Kevin, if you could respond to that question.
Hey, I think just for context, in my school experience, when I went to school, I had the opportunity to be taught by Inuit who taught me in Inuktitut, and that wasn't necessarily the same experience as my siblings who had attended residential school and other forms of school prior to my schooling experience. So I think there's very different experiences that we're dealing with when we have people coming into teacher education. We have people who have experience going to residential school, and then we also have people who are the children of people who went to residential schools, and their experiences may be different. What we've done in our program is we've integrated the two ideas together in terms of language revitalization and teacher training in the creation of the emergent stream. The people going into the stream usually have had limited exposure to Inuktitut, both in their school experience and in their home or community. This can be a result of the impacts of residential schools and ideas from those experiences that are perpetuated, whether it's in the community or in schools today. With language learning in the stream, you might find that there are people who have social and emotional barriers to using or acquiring the language, and those who have been addressed in a space that need to be addressed in a space that feels safe and understanding. before I transitioned roles, when I was still teaching in the classroom, I had a student who explained how they felt emotionally drained from practicing using the language because of their prior experiences and how much that affected them. They may have past experiences of speakers expressing disappointment or being ashamed of their lack of language skills, and those feelings create an emotional, mental, and physical barrier that they were working to overcome. So creating a safe space for learning is a space that is understanding is very important. And in our practice, elders play a key role in working through those challenges. Learning the language can become a family initiative. The learning activities are usually based on the local culture, and the language they're learning is usually local as much as possible when we have the benefit of local instructors. Sometimes our program can be the only post-secondary language program that's being offered in the community that leads to a career. And the graduates are involved in the schools as well as in other community initiatives, even if they don't necessarily become a teacher. And learning to teach while learning the language can give the prospective teachers insight into what it means to be a language learner in a way that those of us who have Inuktitut as a first language, we might not understand or might not easily relate to, specifically for Inuktitut. So it allows them to relate to children who are also acquiring the language. Immersing them into the traditional and contemporary culture supports their sense of pride in their heritage, and it helps them develop their identity. Learning things like kinship, learning through traditional and contemporary technology, learning on and from the land, from people in the community that they might not necessarily had access to in schools or in their personal life, are all key things that students get access to when they're learning in the program. And part of why it's so important is the concepts like inunguinak and pamaksainak, child rearing and training children, that would not have necessarily been incorporated into contemporary school context. They can be integrated and they can be learned and integrated and celebrated, but also researched and understood better through the program because it's Inuit specific. So it allows us to be responsive to an Inuit context in that way.
Thank you for your responses. The next question is specific to Indigenous teacher education programs. So I'll be posing the question to Russ and Kavik, and I'll start with you, Russ. How can Indigenous teacher education programs prepare future educators to effectively teach both language and culture in ways that are both impactful and meaningful for their communities? What are some of the challenges you face in doing so, and how can we address these challenges together?
Wow, that's a big question, but I'll try my best to answer it. I think, first and foremost, I think it's really important that ITEPs continue to hire their faculty from a pool of graduates. And that's because that ensures that there's sort of a continuity of culture. And this isn't to say that there's anything wrong with non-Indigenous people teaching in our programs. We have many non-Indigenous people that teach for our programs, but it's really the Indigenous graduates who understand the centering of pedagogy and how to work that into good learning experiences for students. I think it's really key. I would also say that it's important that in the TEPS that we make language learning a core part of our programs, that it not be an add-on, it not be, as Dr. Ignace said, a few words or 15 minutes every week or so, because that might result in motivation increases. It might result in more people wanting to learn the language, but it does not result in more speakers, and that's really what we need. I would say that it's important for TEPS to work within, most of us have universities that we're affiliated with and that accredit our degrees. And so it's important to work with those organizations and to build strong reciprocal relationships with those universities to ensure that when we do develop language programs, that our students are receiving the proper credits for them, and that we're able to work these into our program as being a systemic part of our programs and not just an add-on. I would also say, you know, one of the things that we often do in our program is that, you know, before our students even take our camp, we are constantly bringing our community speakers, our old ones, our elders into our program. They come with us on trips, they come and have meals with us. So by the time we take our students out to Michif Camp, our students are already familiar with a group of community elders that we work with, and there's that trust that's there and that comfortability that is there as well. I would also say that it's really important that we start looking at the development and offering of extended studies programs and language certification and training. I think it's really important that these certificate programs be developed in consultation with the TEPs and with language speakers. But I think it's always a good option if students who might want to extend the learning that they've been experienced in the TEP programs, if they want to extend that into more language learning via a certificate program, I think it's important that we have those options for our students to engage in, so that they can even, you know, increase their fluency even more. In terms of some of the challenges that we are experiencing, I would say that, you know, again, we rely on non-Indigenous staff in our programs, and wonderful people who do wonderful work. But I think improved funding for the TEPs would allow for more consistent and full-time hiring of Indigenous faculty members, and that would again ensure that there's a consistency of pedagogy throughout, as well as an understanding of how to build those relationships with our community members. I would say, as a language activist myself, one thing I caution other language activists is to not reinvent the wheel. I think a lot of us do that when we start out, and we think that, you know, I have to do everything specific to my language, and so I have to develop all my own models. And certainly, you know, a lot of us have done that work. But for the people who are coming up, I would say there are lots of successful models out there. There are many that exist within our country and within our provinces that are useful and that we can borrow from. And as Dr. Gnase said, not adopt, but adapt for our specific needs and for our communities. And I think one thing that we can do as a community of TEP instructors is to find ways to bring ourselves together, to share best resources and best practice out there that has assisted us in the development of our own programs. I would say the biggest challenge for me in my specific context with Michif in southern Saskatchewan is that our first generation speakers are dying every single day. I have a limited pool every single year. I've literally watched 3 of my language mentors pass away in the past 4 years. And so we need to operate systematically in a way that ensures that we are creating second generation speakers that are capable, not just of speaking, but of teaching the languages. And I think the TEPs provide us with that context. I think that it's really important that we support the people that are doing this work, that we encourage them to engage in graduate studies where they can learn about best practice, that we provide time off for self-study and for learning from fluent speakers, and really operate with the sense of urgency that's required for Indigenous language reclamation.
Thank you. I'll now ask Kavik to respond to that question, please.
Hey, so one of the things that Inuit did, like historically for Inuit education, is develop the Inuktitut curriculum, which is curriculum from the Inuit perspective, which provides an excellent foundation for what Inuit would like to see in schools. But there's also the development of the Inuit Kaimei framework that was done under the advisement of Inuit elders for setting the foundation of integrating Inuit Kaimei into schools. Those are key pieces, but all of the people who have been involved in developing those, but also people that we've been partnering with and bringing into the program, we've learned that we have to be adaptable, but we also have to collaborate. When we learned that, or through understanding what we needed to do, like that the goal was to integrate more Inuktitut and Inuit culture into the program, we've been able to develop 28 courses in both streams, both the proficient stream as well as the emergent stream, that are taught in the language, taught in Inuktitut or bilingually, to allow students to become proficient with the language, to have exposure to cultural content, exercise their values in ways that are relevant to Inuit. Out of the 28 courses that we've developed for each of the streams, the students take at least 22 of them within the degree, which was a significant achievement for the program, and we're continuing to advance that further. Some of the type of courses that we offer, many of them are arts-based. We have courses like material culture on the land, learning on the land, then learning how to teach on the land, learning the structure and science behind the language, as well as language acquisition skills, communications, then learning how to teach the language in general. And to those who have Inuktitut as an additional language, we also have courses in what you might call TEP subject areas, like children's literature, Inuktitut language arts, Inuit music, learning Inuktitut through drama, learning how to do interviews in Inuktitut for research, and learning how to use that research to create learning material, things like, and as well as contemporary context, like Inuktitut literacy using digital media so that there are contemporary applications, as well as using Inuit literature. So it's putting as much cultural and language content as we can, and looking at how can we do more. Some of the challenges that we've faced are with academic research, because it is a post-secondary program. Research and text are usually available in English, as well as Inuit educational research is also available in English. So there's some limitations there. Some educators might not have experience teaching this much in Inuktitut, because the expectation is that the majority of instruction is done in Inuktitut, and many people in their own school experiences might have gone to elementary school with Inuktitut language of instruction, but it's uncommon for Inuit to have gone to middle school and high school or even university being taught in Inuktitut. So you have educators, teachers who were actually taught in, most likely in English, who are advancing. They're the pioneers in advancing Inuktitut language of instruction in a post-secondary context. Some of the ways that we overcome those challenges is to enable the educators to plan together as a team, use community resources, work with elders to design courses so that it's locally developed, allow for support staff like teaching assistants, challenges with sometimes there might also be challenges with training and credentials. So we allow for mentoring and team teaching so that people who are equipped to teach the language but might not necessarily have classroom administrative or academic skills can support them in developing things like their teaching plan or reporting on things like assessment and evaluation. But all of it has to be done with the community. The funding has to allow for it, and it's only because that we were able to secure significant funding that we were able to come up with what other kinds of positions and other kinds of people can we bring to the learning space, but also the planning space, so that we can allow the language and culture to be integrated and used as much as possible. We were able to establish a variety of positions that were not previously established and adapt the existing structure of the classroom space to allow for them to work together. We have to collaborate internally and externally. And one of the things that we've done is we've undergone accelerated program development over a 4-year period. So in 4 years, we went from having 6 courses that would have typically been taught in Inuktitut to 28 for 2 different streams, which is pretty significant. So we do encounter challenges along the way, but we do know that we have to adapt, and we adapt as we go. So we take, I would say, more of a ground up approach. and the local elders are very important to the success of the program. The certificate and the diploma were new exit options, and so even if a student in the program decides to leave the program after acquiring their certificate or diploma, they still have acquired skills, knowledge, and a credential that they can take to the schools and into the community to continue work like language revitalization, even if it's not specifically in the role of a teacher.
Kuya Namik. Now, thank you for your responses. Now I'm going to turn to Commissioner Ignace. And we all know that language immersion is such a powerful way to generate new Indigenous speakers. So given the urgency of language revitalization, what should be a priority in training immersion teachers to create fluent speakers and keep Indigenous languages alive and thriving? Commissioner?
Yes, definitely. We've heard across the country in our hearings with various Indigenous peoples, and there's an urgent need for targeted approaches to produce speakers. And research shows that there are no Indigenous languages in Canada safe, and that all are varying degrees of endangerment. And as such, we've one of our mandates as a commission is to try to understand the vitality of Indigenous languages across the country. And so when we've partnered with Stats Canada, and there's very little data to support Indigenous peoples in the development of their programs that it shows, and the Commission is responding. And today, in collaboration with Stats Canada, we've released a set of 9 reports providing new analysis of 8 distinct languages and 3 isolate languages using data from the 2021 census. And these reports increase access, hopefully will help increase access to more relevant data, including insights to the vitality, acquisition, and usage patterns of Indigenous languages across the country, to support Indigenous peoples in their planning and developing their strategies for revitalization. And there's an over-reliance on existing speakers to teach the languages. I'm a fluent speaker, but I don't know how to teach the language. I'm not a language teacher. I'm just a speaker. And we're learning from the Maori and the Hawaiians, for example, if we don't adequately plan in order to have a solid base of fluent and proficient immersion teachers, the floor is going to drop out from under us as the number of speakers, unfortunately and sadly, are quickly declining. As a commission, we are here to support the efforts of Indigenous peoples as they're best placed to lead it. Since 2023, we have hosted 6 gatherings across the country with language champions to hear about their needs on the ground. Time and time again, we hear the absence of training for Indigenous language immersion teachers, coupled with the lack of certification and accreditation pathways, which impedes the preparation of Indigenous language immersion teachers and the ability to create more speakers. We're losing a lot of our L1 speakers, and we've got to find ways of replacing them if we're to keep our languages and even strengthen them. Our languages were never envisioned to exist, let alone to be taught.
Thank you. I have a deep belief that each of us can leave a positive impact. So I'm really excited to hear the responses to the next question. And I'm going to ask each of you, and I'll start off with Kavik. Looking back on your journey in this space, what is one example of a story or practice that you have implemented or supported for Indigenous educators that has been an indicator that the language program is making a positive impact? Kavik?
Hey, Matnaduki. When I think about my experience when I first started teaching about 15 years ago, the we didn't have elder advisors. I was fortunate enough to have other Inuit who were experienced teachers there to support my own experience becoming an instructor. And I knew that I had a responsibility to teach bilingually. I primarily taught in science. So when I taught human biology, I taught anatomy bilingually. But a lot of it, but I had to rely on people that I knew, whether it was people in my family, in the community, as well as my colleagues, and resources that previous Inuit educators had developed. So the graduates of our program have paved the way for our understanding of Inuit education, both traditionally and contemporary, for both traditional and contemporary context. Elders also inform this work. We have graduates that go into the schools to teach in the language or in Inuktitut or Inuktut. They integrate Inuit Kaime Tokanit, and as we work towards creating a Maiden Nunavut program, we'll be doing it more and more. So when I can think about when I first started teaching to what we have now in the program, we have full-time elder advisors. Elders used to be occasional guests. They didn't have dedicated positions, but through the funding that we've accessed, we've been able to create project-funded positions where elder advisors can be there full-time. They can be there throughout the day. They can work with students. They can work with instructors, both locally and remotely. One example is an elder was working with an instructor who was teaching remotely because we're a blended delivered program. They were supported by a local elder who brought in the local language and context to support the instructor in areas where they might have gaps in their own language skills or knowledge. And one time I went to work and the elder was like, "Oh, when is the next remote meeting? That I really enjoy, joining these meetings and working with people." So we have the ability to train teachers in collaboration with elders and community resources. We have the ability to train teachers on how to implement curriculum like the Inuktitut curriculum and apply the Inuit Kaime Tokanit framework that was developed for Nunavut schools. We don't have all of the answers, but we have lots to start from with the guidance and wisdom of our elders and experienced teachers. So I think we're moving in a good way.
Koyanamig, Commissioner?
Yes, we've through the Commission's own gathering engagements, we have seen the accomplishments of immersion teacher training as it relates to increasing the number of proficient speakers where they were capable and able to have them. Successes of immersion-based frameworks internationally have inspired Indigenous peoples in Canada to follow a similar path, and in witnessing similar efforts in language revitalization initiatives in localities across the country, as showcased by the achievements of the Mohawk language, the Squamish Nation in BC, and the Saanich territory, the Sinchothan community on Vancouver Island have demonstrated great successes in this. So what we've done is the Commission has taken on the role as convener to bring these people together, and we're looking at reaching out to the ministers of advanced education in various provinces across the country, encouraging them to work with the universities to establish immersion languages teacher training programs so that we can develop and create more speakers and teachers across the country so that no language is left behind. And so we're convening various types of gatherings. An important topic we'd like to feature as part of the very first global Indigenous Summit that will be hosted by the Commission, Waves 2025, which will be taking place in Ottawa. And the Global Summit will be an opportunity to stand with Indigenous nations, languages, cultures, and to be part of Wave of Voices committed to bringing our languages out of the shadows and into the light. On this National Indigenous Day of languages. We must remember all those who have fought for our languages and the generations yet to come who will inherit this legacy. So, like this panel, the best way to bring our languages out of the shadows and into the light is to share our stories, build our momentum towards revitalizing our languages.
Thank you. I'll now turn to Russ, please.
Sure. So one of the sorry, I guess core pieces of our Mitchell camp is really that piece of relationality, and so we really work hard to restore that traditional intergenerational transmission. And even though I'm the main curricular developer, I'm the main planner, I'm the guy that really runs the camp day to day. I very much see myself as sort of being a bridge between my students and the old ones that we work with, and really restoring that. And so it's really important that we teach our students how to do ethical visiting and how to provide service to our old ones, and also to work within humility. And we've done, I think, such a good job of that, and now we're sort of in this situation of the Métis Nation of Saskatchewan has worked with school divisions to develop Michif pre-K programs throughout the province. And I would say the vast majority of the people that teach those programs in southern Saskatchewan are people that have come through our Michif camp here at Suntep Regina. And so um, they they are doing good work, but I think because we've done such a good job of helping them to build relationships with older Michif speakers, that we now often compete for the same speakers. And as Dr. Ignace made reference to, we have this issue now of overburdening our first gen speakers. And so I think that we've had some good results, and we've been able to place a lot of our students in programs where they're able to share Michif more readily, but we're also overburdening our remaining speakers, and that's just unsustainable. I think another sign that possibly we're doing good work is that we get many calls from people in the broader community who wish to enroll in our camp. And unfortunately, right now our camp is only offered to students within our program who are working towards their Bachelor of Education degree in the Suntep program. And so, but to me, that says that we must be doing something good, something that is showing some effect, that people are anxious to either take our program or to learn from our program and maybe share some of the successful pieces that we've been working with. I would say that there's a lot of momentum in terms of Michif learning, where there really wasn't that same level of momentum 10, 15 years ago. There's a lot of momentum in our community. A lot of people are seeking Michif resources and Michif speakers in order to learn the language, and that's a good problem to have. Now we just need to figure out where to best put our fluent speakers and our resources so that we can make sure that they're being used most efficiently.
Thank you. What a rich discussion this has been. Thank you so much. Clearly, there's lots of good work happening. Before we move on to questions from the audience, I wanted to give each of you a moment to think of any final thoughts you might want to share. Are there things that we haven't covered that you wanted to raise? And maybe I'll start with you, Commissioner, if you have any final thoughts.
I've just been amazed and grateful to hear both Russ and Kavik for the fabulous and inspirational work they're doing in your communities for your languages. It's in line with what we've been hearing across the country. And I would like to say, I want to honor you and lift you up in honor for the great work both of you are doing. And we'd like to hear more. We'd like to come and even visit your communities someday.
Thank you. I'm now going to move on to you, Russ. Do you have any final thoughts you'd like to share?
I do. And Dr. Ignace, you're most welcome to come to Regina any day. Just bring a coat because it's cold. Some final thoughts that I have, just to sort of echo what Dr. Ignace was saying. I'm deeply humbled, but also deeply and profoundly inspired by the work that Indigenous language activists are doing across this country. I learn from my language mentors every single day, whether that be reading the work that they're writing and being at the cutting edge, or whether it be working with my old ones and soaking up language. I'm just so grateful for all the work that's being done in this country, and I want to give a shout out to one of my language mentors, Dr. Belinda Daniels, who I think is with us today. She works with the Nahiawak language experience, and it should probably be her in this seat and not me, because I think Belinda's really been at the forefront of showing us the way in terms of land-based teachings and immersive teachings and how effective they can be. So I do want to give a shout out to her and to all my language mentors who are just inspiring me every day. I think that one of the things that makes those people really effective is their ability to leverage institutional partnerships and get those to support land and community-based pedagogies. I think that's really the key for us moving forward. I think that we need to focus on best practice and direct resources where they have the most impact. And many people have said that today, that it is immersion. That's really where we need to throw our money at. I think we need to plan for a day when our first generation speakers are no longer with us, sadly. And for myself and my language, that's about 10 years out. And so that's not a lot of time. This means that there is a real sense of urgency to develop certificate programs and also leveled immersive experiences, whether those be language camps or other experiences. I think when it comes to non-Indigenous allies, and I know that somebody has asked a question about that, and I'm happy to address that separately, but I would say that, language allies play a really supportive role. But I would also add that in ILR, we should privilege the work of Indigenous peoples. For us, it's about more than revitalization. It's about reclamation. Reclaiming our languages, reclaims our communities, reclaims our relationships, which reclaims linguistic self-determination, which reclaims the broader self-determination for all of us. And so I think we need to keep that at the forefront as we do this work. I'm also somebody who studies history, and so one thing that I'm well aware of is that when settlement first occurred on Turtle Island, it was settlers who learned our languages, and not the other way around, because they were the minority and they had to speak our languages in order to form lasting relationships, particularly trade relationships. But because they spoke our languages, our relationships were much more balanced in those early years of colonization. And I would say that we need to get back to that place. We need to restore the prominence of Indigenous languages by centering them in educational programs, but also by providing scholarships and grants that help to reclaim languages. And I would also add that I would love to see a day when Indigenous languages are made official in this country, and that resourcing to those languages be commensurate with the levels that we see with French and English. And I think that we're heading towards that point, and I'm inspired by the work that's going to get us there. So thank you for having me today.
Thank you. I'm now going to move over to Kavik to provide final thoughts.
Just to keep it brief, echoing what Russ said about when people came into our communities, they had to learn our languages. Learning our languages is everybody's responsibility, not just those of us who identify like learning Inuktitut is not only for Inuit, it's everyone's responsibility, because we're all biitsepto, we're all providing service to Inuit. So I think that's an important reminder that we all have to work together to do that. And we also have to remember, if not us, who else? If we don't do this for ourselves, who's going to do it for us? We have to be the ones to value it in order to advance it. We have to be willing to change systems. Sometimes we have our own assumptions, and being conscious to our own assumptions requires, we need to be conscious to our own assumptions in order to change those systems, in order for it to work. And I think that's very true of post-secondary institutions. Across Canada, they're taught primarily in English, and that has perpetuated the direction that our schools in K-12 have gone. And when I think about my own experience in school, there was a lot of people in my generation did not value learning Inuktitut because they didn't see how important it was for later in life, because they thought, well, am I going to need it for a career? Am I going to, what value is it going to have for me? So there were things from things like residential school that perpetuated into things like lateral violence. And I think we need to be able to be conscious to those things and be supportive, create supportive and safe atmospheres to be able to talk about them and work through them so that we can heal together. And we also have to be willing to try and understand. Sometimes when I hear younger generations talking about their own language skills, there's a lot of apprehension and hesitation, and I think we need to be mindful of that and how did that come about, and understanding that we need to build that pride early on. It has to start in the early years. It has to start when they're just developing their language skills. That's a key part of, in order for it to be successful. So that's all I have to say.
I thank each of you for your insights during this plenary. So now I'm going to open it up for questions from the audience. And I will state that questions can be submitted right here through the YouTube chat. And we'll do our best to get through as many of the questions as possible. And I know the first question, I think, Russ, you already made reference to it, so I'll pose it to you first. And it's, what advice would you give the teachers on how to go about teaching the language, being a non-Indigenous and a non-speaker of the language?
Yeah, thank you. And thank you for the work that you're doing as a non-Indigenous person, trying to share this language with your Indigenous students. I think it's really, really important, I think, for non-Indigenous teachers to seek out authentic resources without taking them from places where they're already doing good work. And so what I would say is, if I was a non-Indigenous person doing this work, I would really seek out an Indigenous person that is a speaker that I could build an authentic reciprocal relationship with. So I think that there's lots of resources out there that can assist you in developing that relationship. But I would also say that if you're going to do that, that if it's possible to bring an Indigenous person with you, to act as a co-learner with you, to act as a mentor with you, to also help learn that language. And if that person that you're learning from is already doing work within an Indigenous community, I would say, rather than take them out of that community, find ways to allow you to become a part of that language community, to learn that language. I think we're also moving in an era today when there's lots of amazing online resources. There are lots of apps, particularly for larger language groups like Cree and Soto. I'm not sure if the language that you're working with is a wide spoken language, or if it has that level of resources. But I would say, first exhaust the resources that you can find online, but if at all possible, build a meaningful, reciprocal, ethical relationship with a language speaker, and involve an Indigenous person in that process, so that they can be a part of the learning, but also assist you in terms of how to develop that relationship in a good way.
Thank you, Russ. Kavik, do you have any thoughts on that you'd like to contribute for that question?
Yeah, I think there are examples from the Inuit context. When the program first started, it was non-Inuit who were the instructors of the program, teaching Inuit how to teach in schools. And we also collaborate with non-Inuit who have learned the language. So even if you don't necessarily become a language teacher or teacher who teaches the language, being a language speaker is very important, because if you continue to practice the language in that space, even if it's not your mother tongue, then you're uplifting and empowering the people to be able to use their mother tongue in that space. So I think that's an important part, and of course collaboration is key.
Thank you. Commissioner, do you have any thoughts on that question?
Well, I think both Kevik and Russ made eloquent points about that, and it's important that we have non-Indigenous allies working with us to revitalize our languages, because as Murray Sinclair said, that a reconciliation is not an Indigenous problem; it's a Canadian problem. So, in order to revitalize our languages, I maintain it's going to take a whole of not only a whole of government approach, but a whole of Canada approach, us working together in championing Indigenous languages across this country. And I've heard of even Indigenous peoples in going into classrooms and learning the language while teaching what little of the language they knew, by having speakers come in and assist in the teaching of the language. There's different, we have to use all means necessary if we're to truly revitalize all languages in this country, so that no language is left behind. After all, for far too long, our languages have stood in the shadow of others.
Thank you. There's a comment that states that immersion needs money put back in our communities that still speak the language. So I just wanted to share that. And then there's a couple of questions, and I'm going to read them both out loud now. And then I'll open up to either of you, for any of you to respond to. How do we take control of First Nations, Inuit, and Métis education, no strings attached to provincial and federal requirements on our own lands, as this is an original treaty right and agreement? And the next question is, our own people say, meaning Indigenous peoples, say it needs to be done at home, not at school. How do you respond to that respectfully? Does anyone want to take the first stab at that? Kavik?
Thank you, Aluki. I'll just use an example from my experience. As a child, my mother was a unilingual Inuktitut speaker. I was adopted by my grandparents. And every morning she would be listening to the news on the radio, sewing. And one time she made a statement when I was very little. She said, "The government is raising our children." And what she meant by that is the government policies in schools are dictate a lot of what happens in our children's lives, or the things that they learn and the direction that they take. So yes, learning the language does have to happen at home, but it also has to happen in school. And I think Inuit recognized that when they were developing the Inukatigi curriculum. They cannot be exclusive of each other. They have to be responsive to each other. And I think it does have to be done at the federal and provincial level. In the Inuit context, part of the Nunavut Agreement was the creation of a public government, so that us and our children could go to school and learn in the language, but still be part of the larger Canadian economy, global economy. So we can do both. They don't have to be segregated. There are lots of unique ways of doing them in different contexts. There could be community contexts that are exclusive and isolated, and they're also meaningful, but it can also be done publicly in mainstream. We can do it in the mainstream as well, because it's our public. I think is like we are the majority. So
Thank you. Russ, do you have any insights?
Yeah, I would agree completely with Kavik. I think that in an ideal world, everybody would have somebody in their home that is fluent enough to share their language with them, and it would be done in a context that is affirming and comfortable and around the kitchen table, and that looks like the way that we all have learned our languages for, since time immemorial. But I would say that, in the context that I live in, that's not the reality. The reality is that our languages, through many different ways and means, have systematically been erased from our homes. And so what I'm interested in is taking the pedagogy of the home and bringing it to the school. And being able to leverage the tools and the resources that I can access in a system such as public education, but making that realm, decolonizing that space, so that we can build a bridge between our homes and our communities and in schools. I don't want to see Indigenous language completely institutionalized, because I think for me, language lives on the land, it lives in our communities, it lives in the home. But I think for those children that don't have access to speakers at home or in the community, the school can provide a real opportunity to helping them learn at least a little bit of their language, and learn a little bit about where their people come from.
Thank you. Commissioner, do you have any perspectives on the questions?
Well, I think that language belongs in all domains. It should permeate all our lifestyles. I remember when I first started off championing Indigenous languages, there were some leaders out there saying, "Oh, why are you talking about language? It's going to take money away from my economic development or from my housing." I went back and said, "Look, though our languages has to be part of our economics, our economic development. It has to be part of our housing. It has to permeate all our lives. And one of the things that the Maoris have done is they've done well through their education system of revitalizing the language, but they found that there was the problem bringing the language into the home. So now they've created a program of championing to have 1,000 homes taking in and integrating the languages into 1,000 homes. So we have to. There are language camps, summer camps, all kinds of ways and means and strategies. There's many pathways to language revitalization, and I think that we should look at all of them and utilize them, depending on the capacity of the people in the community that are working on the revitalization of languages. But nonetheless, we should look at having, again, it comes back to, as Murray Sinclair said, Indigenous reconciliation is not an Indigenous problem. It's a Canadian problem. So there has to be a whole of Canada approach in working at revitalizing languages if Canada is to attain reconciliation through the revitalization of Indigenous languages.
Thank you all so much. I knew that I would not regret being the moderator for this virtual panel. Any discussion about our languages and education, time just flies by, and I can't believe we're already having to conclude our discussion. But I just want to say that the discussion, this conversation doesn't have to end here, and we encourage everyone to keep learning, engaging, and supporting the work that's being done in all the different spaces. We encourage people to stay connected with the Rideau Hall Foundation by joining the newsletter. We encourage people to learn about the Office of the Commissioner of Indigenous Languages by visiting the website. And I will just note that the French website is still in development. And I know the Commissioner made reference to the upcoming Global Indigenous Languages Summit, but I just wanted to encourage people to check out their website for more information about the WAVES 2025 Global Indigenous Languages Summit that will be held in Ottawa in August. In addition, I wanted to share that the recording of this uploaded virtual panel will be on the Rideau Hall Foundation's YouTube channel following today's session. So for those of you who might have missed it or want to hear some of the insights that were shared today, you're welcome to go check that out. I know there's additional questions that have been posed, but again, this isn't the end. Please seek out people. Let's continue the discussion, especially during this International Decade of Indigenous Languages from 2022 to 2032. I think there's an opportunity for us as Indigenous peoples to continue to champion how important our languages are and how important our languages are to be spoken at home, but also to be seen and heard in different systems, including the education system. I'd like to take a moment to thank these incredible panelists for sharing your insights, your wisdom, your experiences. There were so many rich nuggets of information that we were able to garner from your comments. Commissioner Ignace, Kavikaluak, Russ Fayent, thank you so much for taking the time to share with us your wisdom. And I think each of us listening in will have taken some poignant points. And I think for me, I was struck by how important it is to have culturally relevant information, but also culturally responsive, so that it's important that it becomes very local. As we know, there's a great diversity in Indigenous peoples, and there's a great diversity even within our own languages in terms of dialects. So having the space to be responsive for our communities is extremely important. I want to thank all the audience members for participating participating by asking questions and joining us for this hour. And I will try and end it off with a word that I thought was very appropriate. Rasfayant, I hope I don't butcher it, but it's in terms of good relations, good relationships. And I wrote Miwa Makutowin. And I say, I hope we continue with good relations as we move forward on this important file on our languages and education. And I will conclude by wishing everyone a very happy National Indigenous Languages Day. Udlukatang napusi. Puyan naming.